prepared. I have a Speed Academy t-shirt, so that's where I'm going after this book study. So I'm just happy that you all are joining us this morning. And like Jeannie said, we are reading this book because our author, Dr. Freddie Hiebert, will be presenting at our conference on October 4th for the Reading League Turning the Tide. That's going to be our third annual reading conference. So we're really excited to dig into this book because I think this is really going to lay down the foundation for what we are going to hear from her on October 4th. And I'll give you more information about our conference at the end of this book study. So hopefully you all are here for chapters 1 and 2. Those are the chapters that we are going to go over today. And earlier in the chat, we were including where we're from in the chat. If you can include your role, just so I can see and understand our audience. Also, a little bit about yourself. Please feel free to share anything in the chat, questions that you may have, what you're looking to get out of this book study. So feel free to go in the chat at any point in time and share with us. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can talk about the structure of this book study. All right. So we have Jeannie. Jeannie, you're joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
And I can do that while you just go into your presentation mode. Yes, my name is Jeannie Shop, and currently I serve as the Reading League Wisconsin president. I'm super grateful for that opportunity. I was a former educator, 33 and a half years in the classroom. And I currently am working as a national literacy consultant. So I work for a variety of companies and I go into schools and help them transform and align their practices to the science of reading. So super excited to be here today and join the incomparable Jeannette Russell and how she's leading us large into the space. So thank you, Jeannette, and you're up.
Thanks, Jeannie. So I just want to share a little bit about my background so you all know my lens and my perspective. And I'm talking as a parent of 3 girls, school age, 1 middle school student, and then I have 2 little ones, a set of twins going into 1st grade. So I have that parental lens going into this book. I also have that educator lens as being a classroom teacher for over 15 years in Chicago and in Milwaukee. So I have that teacher lens. I also have that literacy coach and that interventionist lens going into that just based on my background. And I also teach at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, teaching emergent literacy and beginning reading instruction. So while I was reading chapters 1 and 2, I was going back to my earlier years when I first started teaching, and I'm trying to pick out those 6 to 8 words when it comes to vocabulary instruction, my first 5 years or so. And then I'm going into my parental lens and I'm thinking, okay, how am I increasing vocabulary instruction when I'm talking with my girls? This book took me down many different roads, and I had to reread chapters 1 and 2 last night because I read the book a while ago. So I had to reread it, and different things were popping up as I was reading this chapters 1 and 2. So, quick overview. We're doing chapters 1 and 2 today, June 22nd. On July 13th, chapters 3 and 4, 5 and 6 on July 20th, 7 and 8 on July 27th, and on August 3rd, chapter 9. We have some fabulous facilitators going over the remaining chapters. So hopefully if you're here for chapters 1 and 2, please join us for the remaining chapters. And all of the chapters are facilitated by some of our board members for the Reading League Wisconsin. I wanted to start off with this quote, which is located on page 8. Hopefully we all have our books in front of us. On page 8, to ensure success as strong, independent readers, students must know more than the definitions of words. They must grasp the concepts behind words. So I'm just going to pause for a moment so you all can think about this quote. And I've been doing a lot of talking just in the beginning. Feel free to come off mute or put one or two words in the chat on what you think this quote might mean to you. Mm. Oh, I love it. I'm hoping someone comes off mute and explain or share with us your word and the why behind the word that you put in there in the chat.
I'll go. I had this one highlighted too when I went through and read it. And for me, it was about the relationship of words, connecting things to what we already know, connecting to new learning, and then the application of the words. If you don't have those concepts behind it, you can't do any of that. And it doesn't come from a definition.
Yes, I love that, Rebecca, the connection. It definitely doesn't come from the definition, having the relationship, knowing the relationship behind those words. I love that. Anyone else want to share? Thank you, Rebecca, for coming off mute. Don't be shy.
Good morning. I'll come off mute. My name's Gina,
Regina.
and I just put this in the chat, but I had highlighted that quote in my text immediately as well. And I think because I've been doing a lot of other work with reading other texts like the comprehension blueprint and the writing rope, and what really has been resonating with me as of late is I've always known how important our work is, but the complexity of what we're trying to develop in our students so they can become literate citizens that are part of a democratic society. And this just highlights that it goes so much further beyond the surface level if we can be vulnerable with ourselves and how to approach that as educators.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Gina. Okay, let's move on. So I have 3 learning targets that I pulled from the 2 chapters. The 3 learning targets will really set the tone and the foundation for this book study for chapters 1 and 2. And our discussion questions stem from the learning targets. The first one, to understand the generative approach or making meaning of unknown words and vocabulary instruction. To know the importance of relationships among words, not individual words. And to understand the why, what, and how of small changes equals big results. And I love chapter 2 because chapter 2 gets into the how. And I just remember being in the classroom. We learned so much during professional learning week. We learned so much about the why and the what, and we sometimes forget about the how. Okay, so now how am I going to implement best practices? I need someone to show me or tell me or guide me through it. Where is the how in some of our work? So once we get to the remaining chapters 3 and on, we really dig into the how. Chapters 1 and 2, that just lays the foundation for the why, the what, and then the how, letting us know what we should expect in the remaining chapters. So the summary of chapters 1 and 2. I don't want to go into a long, detailed summary because I'm assuming that we already read the chapters. What I really want us to spend our time on are the discussion questions. But just a short summary for chapter 1. Chapter 1 starts on page 1, learning words and how they work, the vocabulary and the text. We have that two-way relationship between vocabulary and text. We know that vocabulary, once we understand vocabulary, we know that we have a relationship when it comes to comprehension. Focus on relationship among words, not just individual words, and how to implement new vocabulary insights. That last piece of chapter 1 is very short. It really goes into chapter 2, which is that implementation stage, which we have the small changes equal big results. Dr. Freddie starts with the why. That was very short. She gets into the what, and then she digs into the how, and she spends a little bit more time on the how, and also gives us tables at the end of each chapter to show us, okay, here are some small changes that you can make. Here are some examples and how this can fit into your vocabulary instruction. Okay, so we have, let's see the size of our group. We have 30 people that are joining us right now. So I thought, just depending on the size of our group, we should definitely go into breakout rooms. Sometimes I'm a fan of breakout rooms. Sometimes I'm not a fan of breakout rooms, just because I really want everyone to have a voice and to be able to share. So just from Jeannie, what do you think? What do you think about breakout rooms for today to go over our 3 discussion questions?
Well, how about everybody give us a thumbs up if they want to go into a breakout room and the majority says we're breaking out.
Let me stop sharing just so I can see.
Because they can do it with their icons. They can give us a thumbs up in the Zoom icon.
Yes, please do that.
And when we're recording, nobody hears the breakout discussion as well.
Yes, so please feel free to become vulnerable during those breakout.
So maybe perhaps we don't break out. How's that? Because while we're recording, everybody can hear the conversation.
Yes, okay.
And people who are still in their pajamas and haven't done their hair yet are not going to feel like, okay, I'm in a breakout room and I'm not ready for that.
And we didn't get any thumbs up yet, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So hopefully people on mic.
Yes.
Yeah, no hair, no breakout.
This cannot be a book study or book discussion without others joining us. Okay. So let's see what question we want to talk about. Discussion question number 1, number 2, or number 3. So number 1, thinking of the generative approach to vocabulary instruction. And that's just basically generating meanings of words, of unknown words, in order to understand the text. How do you assist students with being able to generate meanings of unknown words? So I'm thinking about your common practice right now. Even if you're not using this approach where we're thinking about small changes, what approach are you using currently? So how do you assist students with being able to generate meanings of unknown words?
Yeah, let's use our chat and let's have people to share out. That'd be great, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about discussion question number 1 for the next 5 minutes then. So Lauren, you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, I am still in my pajamas. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, someone just said in the chat, morphological awareness, teaching morphological word parts. And I also emphasize syntax a lot. Like, what do the parts of speech tell us about what this word might mean in the sentence? So we can make sense of, well, this must be a noun. So that gives me some clues.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that you are using the meaning of the suffix to say, okay, this suffix is making this word a noun, or this suffix is making this word an adjective?
Yes, it can be. It can also be just in the sentence, like this has to be the verb in the sentence, right? Because these other words we know are not verbs.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's also about what part of speech is
Right.
missing and how do we fill that in?
Right. It's
so
kind of
that sentence structure.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
May I ask what grade level you teach, Lauren? Just out of curiosity.
I'm actually a professor at UW-Whitewater, but I was a high school reading interventionist for 12 years.
Gotcha. Because I was just thinking my kids wouldn't even know what a noun is. So I thought it must be older kids. Thank you.
Well, you have to
Right.
explicitly teach that. My practice, I used a curriculum called Language ! There's a new version, Language Live now.
Yeah.
but that explicitly teaches parts of speech and syntax. And then you use that knowledge of syntax to build reading comprehension and vocabulary development skills. So.
Right. Thank you.
And Barbara, what grade do you teach? Because you just said your kids wouldn't know that.
Mostly second and third grade, some fourth and fifth. So I do a lot of morphology instruction with my older kids, but I was just thinking of my younger kids. I do a lot of explicit instruction. We do a lot of like the Foursquare, and I'm an interventionist, so I only work with them in small group. But we use context clues as well, but I do a lot of decoding, so we don't have a lot of rich text, generally speaking, with what I do.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Barbara. I'm just thinking because you're saying your kids wouldn't know that necessarily, and it's great that Lauren pointed out that we need explicit instruction to start that off. We have lots of great conversations in the chat, and then we have several hands that are raised. The first person that had their hand up, maybe Michelle, I think you were the first person. Then we have Rebecca. Then we have, is it Cindy? Cyndi?
Yes.
Cindy, I think you were first. Did you have your hand up first?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so Michelle, go ahead.
I would be fine if Cindy goes first. That's totally fine. Go, Cindy.
So I am actually a dyslexia teacher. So I've been working with elementary age children, but I'm moving into middle school. And I am a hardcore believer in grammar knowledge and morphological knowledge. So I start my kids off right away with looking at even like our smallest suffixes when we are first getting started, like our consonant suffix s and vowel suffix ing, just looking at how those are used in words and how we can learn so much about that word based off of what suffix it might be added to. I also do a lot of like multiple meaning things, and I love wordplay, and so I love to get kids to see that a word can be a noun in one context, but then it can be an adjective in another context and a verb in another context. So I guess like the interventionist earlier said, like we don't have a whole lot of access to really rich text because all of my kids have been learning how to read and just decoding. And so our texts are very simplified, but even though it's very simplified, I'm still able to get those rich conversations with them based off of what they do know.
Mhm. Good, thank you for sharing that, Sydney. Let's move over to Michelle.
Hey, so I was really thinking, I mean, this whole year we've been talking about needing vocabulary instruction, and we're in the midst of kind of phasing out reading workshop and going to something else to be determined. And so we're trying to figure out, how do you teach vocabulary deeply? The thing is I keep, as a district reading specialist, I work with the staff, and I keep hitting this wall of, but where's the vocabulary worksheet? And I was like, okay. So my issue is that, you know, I keep trying to explain that for me, it's the interconnectivity of vocabulary terms and how their relationships, and I show them the semantic mapping, and I show them other really strong vocabulary strategies that have worked tried and true, and they still want that comfort of like, just give me the list and we'll like do the worksheet. And I'm like, but the crossword puzzle isn't really deep vocabulary knowledge. So I feel like not only like, how do we generate the words and how do we like help students make meaning, but also like, how do we support teachers, or in our own practice as teachers, understand how to do this work authentically and deeply in a way that's going to expand knowledge, instead of staying in this like old fashioned, if I don't have a worksheet, they haven't learned it kind of a format. And that's my big grappling. Like, that's just where we're at. Sorry, didn't mean to add a question to the conversation.
No, that's absolutely fine, Michelle. That's a great point because I asked, what are you doing in your practice, or what does vocabulary instruction look like right now in your practice? And you definitely shared great information, sharing that you're seeing that teachers are asking for that vocabulary worksheet. And I always go back to, even though we model and have we explicitly teach skills to our students, but what about our teachers? And I said that in the very beginning. We're always looking for, I was always looking for that how. I need someone to show me, teach me, and I will do it. But we do have teachers that may be a little bit more reluctant, and it takes time to change your practice. So I just say keep doing what you're doing, Michelle, and keep pushing that button, and hopefully explicitly showing teachers the research behind it and the evidence and the practice that really works. And maybe starting off with using small changes, because we don't have to do something that's just too big or unattainable goals. And Dr. Freddie pointed that out in her book as well in chapter 1 about having these unattainable goals. Start with something small and you'll see big changes. Rebecca, go ahead.
So I guess I was looking at this from a little bit different standpoint. I've worked with special ed, I've done reading intervention, and now I'm doing work with English language learners. And so for us, we take a lot of time to look more at the concepts and building word webs and making connections to words they might already know to help them understand new words and keep expanding their vocabulary. I agree that we need to do more with like the morphology and the syntax sort of stuff too, but I think building more conceptual understandings and making sure we're connecting to what students already know is really important.
I definitely agree with that, Rebecca. And think about our teachers. What background knowledge do our teachers have when it comes to morphology and syntax and vocabulary, when it comes to just vocabulary instruction in general? So thank you for adding to discussion question number 1. And Jeannie, I know you were working in the chat, so thank you for doing that. And we really had some rich discussion in the chat. But let's move on to number 2. We'll do that one really quickly. So what criteria does the author suggest for selecting vocabulary words to teach? And I put page 8 there. And we can basically pretty much, I mean, she didn't explicitly state it, but we can infer, well, what do you think Dr. Freddie's criteria is for selecting vocabulary words to teach? Feel free to come off mute with that one, or we can answer that one in the chat, share your ideas there. So take a moment to review page 8 or other pages of where you might see Dr. Freddie's stance on teaching or selecting vocabulary words. And Sarah, yep, thanks for sharing that. Ones that connect to each other. Anything else? The relationship versus like the 8 words that we're very unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I liked the fact that in the book they talked about how in the like Annie's gifts, they wanted to make sure the vocab words kind of all related to music so the kids could really understand what was going on in the story. I think those are, are definitely important to teach.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I thought Annie's Gifts was a great example to include, and also actually including how you would teach the actual vocabulary lesson within that chapter. So Dr. Freddie not only gave us an example, she actually showed us and said, well, you can use a semantic map and then use the relationship between the words that are related to music. Let's move over to number 3. What arguments does the author present to highlight the small changes of vocabulary instruction in the classroom? So page 12, this is where Dr. Hiebert starts to get into the actual implementation piece of it all, which is on page 12, the what, the why, and then the how. So why does she really think that these small changes are important to make? And Rebecca, is your hand still up from last time, or you have something to add?
No, sorry, I'll put it down.
And Meredith, small changes must be explicit, time-driven, materials available because small changes are easier to implement than big ones. I love that. Small changes are definitely easier to implement. And definitely less resistance. And Michelle, when you say less resistance, do you mean with teachers or with students? Who's the audience there?
Well, I find that I think teachers were amazing at so many things. Sorry, allergies. And we are used to the ebb and flow of education. But for some reason, when we say we're doing change work, especially if it's an initiative based, whether at the school level or definitely at the state level, think Act 20, people's hackles get up and then they give you all the reasons why you can't do it. And they don't open their minds to the why or how it's going to be beneficial or how it's going to make them better practitioners. It's just no, 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 no. So I find that when I work with teachers and we do small little things, they are open to how it can help refine their practice without making them feel like I'm trying to change them, even though I might be. They might be really bad at it, or the students might really need something different. But we tend to get a little resistant
Yes.
as teachers.
Yes. I was a resistant teacher at some point in time in my teaching career. So I understand. I understand that part. And then I also understand the other part when I was an interventionist and a coach working with resistant teachers. So I'm thankful that I wasn't that hard to work with. Anything else before we move into the application piece? Right now it's 9:28 and I want to give us a little bit time to work on the next slide. Yes, and if the results are measurable, student and teacher buy-in. If it's measurable and you're seeing some of those results, teachers and students will definitely buy into some of those small changes. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so let's get ready to do this. So we have an application piece that I added for this presentation, which starts on page 15. So the how. So we are getting ready to do a little work, us in this space, in this group. So I'm going to give us a little time. So what changes will you consider for creating or enhancing habits for vocabulary instruction? So if we go to page 15, this is where Dr. Freddie starts off the how. And the bottom of the first paragraph or where it says, number one, defining the change, identifying a specific time and place for the new practice to occur. And then number three, identifying when and how to celebrate and review progress in making the change. And Dr. Freddie actually goes through the steps of the how. So this is what I want to give us some time to do. So she even says that every time she starts a workshop, she often gives a short description of a small change and talks about the philosophy behind it. And she asks for everyone to list a small change, define it, write it down, thinking about a specific time and a place where this practice will occur, and then identifying when and how to celebrate. While you were reading this book, did anyone actually do this activity? Okay, if you did not, we're going to get time to try it out now. And Michelle, thanks, you started to think about it. So I know everyone didn't get a chance to participate and share out. You were sharing in the chat, but now this is a chance for everyone to participate and share out. So I want to give us about 5 to 7 minutes to start thinking about this work. So 5 to 7 minutes to start thinking about the how. So first thing you're going to do, you're going to think about and define a change. And this can be in your own practice, in the classroom. If you don't have a classroom, maybe you're working with a small group of students. If you don't have a small group of students, maybe you're working at the university level. What can you do to support novice or pre-service teachers? If you, and I think I saw a virtual reading literacy tutor in the chat. Think about how you can do that during your literacy tutoring instruction. So any place that you can start thinking about these changes. So 5 to 7 minutes, define the change, identify the specific time and place for the new practice to occur. And then number 3, identify when and how to celebrate and review progress in making the change. Okay, do you all think we can do that for 5 to 7 minutes? And then we're going to come back as a group and we can actually share out. I would love if we could take the time to share out. Any questions before we have some quiet time for 5 to 7 minutes? Any questions on the directions or what we're supposed to do? Everyone is good and everyone knows that what our next steps are. Okay, your 5 to 7 minutes start now. So let's take 2 more minutes. Hopefully by now, everyone should have been able to define their change. Maybe you have gotten to the point where you are able to list the time and place. And then maybe now you're working on how you will identify the celebration and the review. Okay. Did everyone get enough time to at least have us to start and be ready to share? Or does anyone need a couple more minutes? If you need a few more minutes in the chat, feel free to say I need 1 more minute. Okay, so I'll share mine first. And I have on my mommy brain right now and my parental lens, and I'm thinking about my little ones, my 6-year-old twins. And I'm thinking about experiences that they are having right now. And one that came to mind, I wrote several ones from different perspectives, but this one is one that I'm sharing because this is what we're dealing with right now. So my little ones have a track meet today, and so they're involved in running. One change that I can make, I can start definitely using some of those specific words that are related to the sport of track and field. And my word that my kids asked me about the other day was acceleration and speed. So I said one change that I can make is definitely using words related to that specific experience, mainly that sport right now, and making time to discuss and having conversations. And I saw someone put that in the chat that they wanted to start with, that they chose conversations as a place to start. And that's what I'm thinking for my littles at home, is to have conversations more so related to what they are experiencing at this moment. And then my way to practice that is before we go to practice, where I'm explicitly using that word and using different features of that word to make sure that the kiddos have that embedded in their conversations, and that will be a way to celebrate and review the word as well. So that's just a little piece of what I'm thinking. Now, anyone want to share or add it in the chat? Something small. And Cindy, your hand is up, so go ahead, feel free.
Thank you. I don't have my video on because we're actually driving to the airport, but I have very, very little time with my students. I only get 30 minutes of actual classroom time, and the only time where I find is quote unquote free that I haven't really been intentional with is my walk with them from picking them up from their classrooms to my classroom. And so my intention is to really focus on what that lesson is for the day and pick out a concept that a grammar concept with something to do with our words, and then that's our conversation that we have on our way to class. And then practice will be once we get into class and we're using those words and manipulating them and using them in our conversations. I'm hoping that, yeah. It's still like, you know what I mean? Like it's still up in my head, like in a million different directions, which is kind of my problem. That's why I really like this whole like small changes thing, like to focus myself. But I want to use that time, that transition time, more intentionally.
Yes. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Transition time, we're thinking as educators, we're thinking about a million different things during transition, and sometimes you just need that chance to breathe during transition time. But if you can fill that gap with an activity, I mean, that's definitely going to be great if you have that capacity to fill that gap. And that's just such a small change because we have several different transitions during the day in the classroom. Let's go with Rebecca.
So I was thinking about the collection piece of things, and we use Amplify in our district. So I was thinking about reviewing those vocabulary words and picking out one word from each lesson that kind of is the big idea of the lesson and building a word web with it, and then leaving the last 5 minutes of my instructional time for kids to add their own words from the text that somehow connect to the word that I chose.
And then did you identify a time and a place, Rebecca?
Yeah, the last 5 minutes of my lesson time. I get about 30 minutes with each group, so I think I can cut out about 5 minutes to make time for that.
Yeah. And that's definitely a great example of a small change, that last 5 minutes. Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. Sarah Morgan, your hand is up.
My tutoring's pretty prescribed for good reason. But I was thinking about something that I could suggest. We do our students, so I work with students 5 days a week, but for 15-minute sessions. One of the things we do is once students master their high frequency words, then we do fluency practice. And then also once a week, every student does reading. And we do in the fluency do some vocabulary, but I was thinking in looking at those texts and seeing words that connect and making those the focus of the vocabulary. And maybe if they aren't there, is maybe re-looking at the texts we use so that it could build their vocabulary in that little comprehension piece. So I really was thinking it's something I could suggest. So I think that connects to kind of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Sarah. I mean, even though your lessons are prescribed, you're looking for a small change to make that wouldn't really stray away from the actual lesson
Mhm.
anyway. Yep. Anyone else want to share? Go ahead, Sarah.
So I was kind of thinking of this in a different perspective. Our whole middle school is trying to get more consistency as far as literacy instruction. So one thing we had actually talked about before the end of the school year is vocabulary. And so what we had talked about was for consistency purposes, because vocabulary is so important, that how you teach it is important, but where kids are traveling from class to class to class to class, if there's consistency in how that is taught, then the focus could be, would be more on the actual content. So one thing we talked about is, showing everyone the how to use the Frayer model, and all the different options that would be available with the Frayer model, depending on the class, because obviously you wouldn't necessarily use it. But even like in math class, when you're learning new vocabulary for shapes or, different words, using that Frayer model, because the kids would be familiar with it, the focus would be on the content and not necessarily on the process. And the process would be something that everybody in the building could get familiar with. So that's kind of what we were thinking there. And then looking at, and then I hadn't really thought about how we would look at celebrate at the end, but it could be like a whole staff meeting type of thing we could do.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely can work when you're bringing information back to the staff. You're starting something and then you go back to the staff and say, okay, well, how did we do? Let's
Yeah.
review, celebrate. I mean, it makes it, I mean, whatever practice you're doing, it makes everyone feel seen and heard, and it's relevant. You
Right.
introduced it, so let's come back to it. Okay. Anyone else would like to share? I see some great discussion in the chat, and Jeannie is taking care of the chat. Jeannie, did you notice anything in the chat that you want to share out that someone put in the chat? I didn't get a chance to read through it.
They're just pointing out different things they could do in their classroom. Just really the dialogue is just a run off of what's being talked about. So they're just conversing about other things. So I don't think there's anything.
Anything new? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking care of that, Jeannie.
Yeah.
So let's be mindful of your time. It's 9:51, and I really appreciate everyone coming together, working on this application piece of the how, and you all actually going into this and writing and defining a change and talking about a time and the place. We really want to make sure the books that we're reading during this book study are relevant and it's something that can help you in your practice. So let's quickly reflect. And the reflections that I really wanted to point out were the small changes equals big results, because that's really the bulk of this book and why we are reading it. So understanding the why, the what, and the how, and you will definitely see that in the chapters that are coming up, in chapters 3 to 8. So we'll definitely get to a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper. So did we meet our learning targets? Did we talk about ways that the generative approach is in our own practice? I'm going to say a yes to that. To know the importance of relationships among words, not just individual words. You all talked about connections and looking at the relationships and not just a list of 6 to 8 words just because we think they are the hardest words in the text. And then we understand the why, the what, and the how of small changes equals big results, because we just worked on that activity for our own practice. So what's next? Chapters 3 and 4. And I want to say that Amy is leading chapters 3 and 4. They just made a switcheroo. I have to check my email. But either way it goes, chapter 3 and 4 is July 13th. Chapters 5 and 6, July 20th, 7 and 8, July 27th, and August 3rd is chapter 9. I really want you all to visit us on social media, follow us. We have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, YouTube, we have Twitter, so we are on all social media accounts. We have our Turning the Tide in Reading Instruction. That conference is October 4th. We have a website, the Reading League Wisconsin. So if you just type in the Reading League Wisconsin in a Google search, you will receive tons of information about us. So the last thing I want to just say is thank you for joining us at 9 a.m. this morning. Hopefully we get to see you all for the future chapters. But before we close, is there anything that anyone would like to add at all or to share before we come to an end? And I'm going to stop sharing just so I can see the little screens now. Jeannie, any final words as our board president?
There's just been some great dialogue. I'm just really excited about everybody being here and being committed to this work. And on this Saturday afternoon in the middle of summer, it's fantastic that we're continuing to lean into just growing. And I just thought I'd add on. I mean, change definitely is hard in schools, and I know, Jeanette, you'd probably agree with me that I know I've had great success helping teachers rethink their practices when they truly understand what the research is saying and we truly understand what the data is telling us. And so much of us have been conditioned into this work and continue to use the same practices that we did when we were students in school. And we just really kind of think that that's really how it's supposed to be. But I know with some of my teachers in my middle school, as soon as we started talking about, this is what the evidence is telling us is really going to be great levers of change, they definitely started opening up to rethinking their practices.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeannie. So I'm going to come to a close and give you all your Saturday. And hopefully you all have a great weekend. And we hope to see you on July 13th for chapters 3 and 4.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.